Okay, it's Friday, I think. Week number 3. Should know what's going on in our syllabus here. Our syllabus says we need to review leadership. And the last class that I did was about ethics. So this is a leadership review. Now, last year we discussed this as well. And so it's review for some people. But it was also, I think, towards the end of the first semester. So it's very possible that you were swamped in post-pandemic problems, post-pandemic wave problems. And maybe you don't remember it all. So it does connect to management, so it's POLC. And when we work with leadership, we usually think in terms of planning, the whole scope of the POLC framework. So we have planning, organizing, which sometimes is called which is sometimes called coordinating, and that has to do with the resources. The L, so if you ask for the relationship between leading and managing, it's that leading is part of management, right? And then there is another, there's another issue where, some leaders, they can't manage. They're only, visionary, they have visionary planning, but then when it comes to actually having to figure out how to do and organize and resource things. Some people are ideas people, right? And some people are make the system solve the problem. So you can at least work with this for a minute. Yes, people do it. So planning has to do with, so we have 3 levels. Of course, we have the classic 3 levels of management. We have the top levels, the CEOs, the ones who are supposed to steer the boat in the right direction, and then we have the middle managers whose primary function is to make sure that there's enough people to move the boat, the engine has enough coal or whatever power is being used in the engine, and that the workers are fed and that they're able to keep rowing the boat for whatever length of time needs to be rowed. And in more sophisticated settings, understand the motivations of employees and how to motivate them and manage them and keep them and not lose them. And then in even more sophisticated settings, be able to understand that in a cross-cultural environment. And then we have the line managers, the ones that are there on the field, right? We have the kind of classic way of imagining a football manager. We have the football manager who has the vision of how the team can, over a long period of time, develop consistency, success, and then we have the people who do player personnel, and they get the players and they try to match the vision of the manager with the kind of players that they pay for, hire, transfer, or whatever. And then you have the actual on-field captain of the team. And that person is there on the field, like actually working in the process of getting results. and there for inspiration and motivation and leadership of that group that's right there. So the top is the long-term planning, the middle is the short-term, and the line managers are trying to meet the KPIs of the day. Organizing, mostly in the middle, mostly in middle managers is where, and there's so much there that's why they get kind of left back in terms of leadership. Managers are not expected to lead. They're expected to be able to handle lots of information, lots of data, lots of issues with people, and be able to keep the boat going. So that's the point of the organizer. Although, I'm going to suggest, and I think I did this in ethics, is that middle managers also are starting to have a role in towards, because they control the resources, so they have ethical choice. The ethical dilemma often comes to the middle manager. The ethical dilemma of, do we hire a sweatshop? If we outsource, do we actually look at the working conditions of the company that we're outsourcing from? When we get resources from a supplier, does that supplier have ethical sourcing? Do they use child labor or slave labor? What's happening in terms of all of that managing of resources? So it starts to be a point where there can be leadership in middle management. Probably middle managers, I don't know. Is that part of the job description they would want to have? I mean, mostly when there's an ethical dilemma and one manager can push the responsibility for the problem to another, they might do that. So the question might be, where does the ethical choice, where in the management structure, who has responsibility for the ethical choices that the company makes? Do the line workers? Probably not. Although, if they see that their working conditions are unfair, maybe that's when they strike, that's when they are supposed to do that. So, anyway, we're talking about leadership. Not as much leadership in the middle group. The leadership is typically at the top and the bottom. It's the manager, and then the player who is the captain of the team. So usually on the top level, and on the line level, leading includes what? Leadership, decision making. Decision making comes at the resource stage as well. Communication is big, and motivation is big. That's a large part of leading, is to communicate, get people on board, get them to give their best in terms of productivity and their motivation. And to be able to facilitate the teams to be effective. This is especially true in the matrix structure or a project management situation. So those project managers, they really have to have good leadership skills. And then you have controlling, which is, here, systems and processes is KPIs, right? All the goals of the company, all the different targets that they set to improve all their performance elements is going to be controlled. It needs to have a KPI and recorded and checked. And sent to the right place. And then you have human resources control, which is what I was saying, that the middle managers, they start to be the ones who have to make those ethical decisions about human resources and manage them in such a way that they're controlled for the triple bottom line, right? Triple jam from last video. So from there, we can go to classics. So POLC, when you see the term management in a question, and this acronym should come up to you, you should be thinking like, oh, okay, I can talk about different, this way you don't forget anything. that could be connected to the topic. So here we talk about the different kind of leadership styles, which it calls for a quick review. Here's a review of the styles that we talked about last year with Leuven. Also, Carl Levin, the change management guy. He was more active and he had more diverse interests than Cotter.
We all have our own style. How we like to dress, the type of movies we enjoy, the type of car we prefer, even our communication style, or how we prefer to communicate. We often refer to different ways people communicate when they lead groups as their leadership style, and that's what this video will focus on, the style's perspective on leadership, specifically the view proposed by Kurt Lewin in 1939. Lewin has been referred to by some as the father of modern psychology. After the trait leadership perspective fell out of favor, that was the belief that leaders are born, not made, and share common traits, Lewin suggested an alternative approach. Instead of focusing on traits of leaders, he advised looking at leadership styles. He came to this conclusion after running experiments with children to see how they responded to different behaviors. Lewin identified 3 leadership styles: authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire. We'll start with authoritarian, sometimes called autocratic. This style is a very directive one. The autocratic leader has complete authority and control over the group and the decisions being made. The work is done the same way, with little room for creativity. Group members are not encouraged to provide input. Most people hold negative views of an autocratic leader, often describing them as bossy or a dictator. However, there are definitely times when the authoritative leadership style is effective. When decisions need to be made quickly, in an emergency situation, when the leader is the most knowledgeable and experienced person in the group, and when it's important to know who is in charge. It can also be appropriate when the group is languishing and not getting anything done. Sometimes someone has to step in and take charge. Beyond the obvious drawback that the authoritarian style tends to be less enjoyable from a subordinate's perspective, the lack of hearing dissenting views may result in poor decisions.
Alright, let's just try to apply.
The lack of hearing dissenting views may result in poor decisions.
In terms of cross-cultural context, right, we can think about this as well, because that's what we're supposed to do. Characteristics of authoritarian. Top-down, total decision-making power. Usually really functions in a hierarchical organization. This is a classic kind of original style of big, massive factory organizing leadership. And as far as it goes, it's effective. I mean, you're not gonna, well, we've all seen movies when there's a war movie, when there's some lower level titled soldier who's trying to tell or give information to the general about, hey, here's a message for the general that you really need to be aware of this, because if you continue on this path that you're on right now, it's going to be a disaster. You're going to get ambushed, wiped out. And the general's like, we're doing what we're doing. We're already committed to this. Take this guy to the brig. Sometimes they even throw the messenger in jail, or shoot the messenger. But in a military organization, for example, there's no, if you have the lower levels of the organization asking questions and challenging the authority of the higher levels of the hierarchy, generally it's not a very effective army. So it really is effective if you're trying to mobilize, and you do have the correct strategy, and you do have the correct vision. So if, like it says here, the leader is the most knowledgeable. If they really know what needs to be done, there's probably a time when this authoritarian approach would work well. Not usually in a creative situation. Teaching on Zoom, I think a lot of students, they want, not in our class, but in my night classes, I think they want the teacher to be authoritarian. We're trying, we're like just telling them what to do for hours, whereas as the teachers, we're like, hey guys, what would you want to do? Like, what are your, do you think this is good? Can we get some feedback so we can find something that's enjoyable? No feedback. So it's like, this is where it also gets cross-cultural, because depending on the country, you can have a radically different understanding of what leadership is supposed to be. In certain countries, if you have an authoritarian approach, you will probably fail, because the people they won't respect you, because you don't listen to their opinion. So if you have a country where people are used to consensus, which means group decision making, or they're used to a democratic kind of idea where there's an exchange, and you come in there going like, okay, I'm from another country, and I'm going to tell you how everything is going to be. Okay, and there's silence, because even, if you're in that situation, in a cross-cultural setting, you better be the most knowledgeable one. Because if there's anyone out there who feels like they have enough knowledge to like ask questions, they won't. And they'll also kind of feel disrespect, they'll disrespect that person. So, not great for creativity either in that situation. But then there are other countries where it's like, if you come in and you're like, hi guys, I want to meet everybody and have a big meeting and share how you feel the direction of the company has been going and what you think we can do to improve it. I'm the new manager, nice to meet you. And they look at the new manager, and, if they're used to authoritarian leaders, they're all going to look at each other like, wow, this guy, he doesn't have any clue. He doesn't know what he wants to do. He doesn't even really know what's happening with the company. Did he do research? I mean, why is he asking us what's going on with the company? So the leader is supposed to know, they're just supposed to know. And if they don't look like they know, or fake like they know, and that might be true with teachers too. I mean, I don't have a problem to say I don't know something, or to suggest that we should research it to find out. I think to me that's a fair approach. But there are other teachers who are very, I think they're very shy to admit that they need to do more research, and they'll make up a story or even make up an answer that might not even be correct, and convince you with their power and with their authority that you should accept that answer, even though it's not correct. It's tempting. I've been in a position where I can do that. And it's like, oh, I could just tell them whatever I want to tell them, and then tell them that's right, and then that's it. And some cultures, they would expect me to do that. They wouldn't want me to say, I don't know. That would be an embarrassment, right? So it's very complicated when it comes to this kind of, you have to understand the power distance on Hofstede in particular. That's an important one. And maybe even the long-term, short-term is very important for, if you're talking to like an American manager, for example. Obviously, the authoritarian style is a situational leadership style. When there's an emergency, there's a fire, There's no time for let's all make a campfire and decide what we're going to do about the fire. No time.
If you use this style, make it clear that even though you are in charge, you respect everyone. If your team members have expertise, acknowledge it, or at the very least don't discount it, even if your decision is firm. Recognize your team's accomplishments, both as individuals and as a group, in public if possible. Refrain from criticizing in public, however. Be consistent in how you apply your decisions and interact with people, and be reliable and trustworthy. You don't have to tell your team everything, but what you do tell them should be truthful. Be very clear as to your expectations. If possible, give the reasoning behind those expectations and what your team can expect in the future. And make sure you provide your team with what they need to do the job.
So if you're an authoritarian leader, like French business leaders tend to be kind of autocratic, when you're in that position and you're in another country, it may not work well. There are, some strategies that you might be able to break out that'll help you kind of navigate and get at least some level of respect, right? So if you're like a crazy psycho who one day says, today all the windows will be closed in the office, and the next day all the windows are closed, and they're like, why are these windows closed? Open all the windows. It's like, why? And there's no reason for it, and so if it's not consistent in its approach, people can deal with consistency. They might not like it, but if it's consistent and transparent to a point, and people can understand at least the goals or the motivations that they're supposed to have, they might not agree with the style, but they will be willing to be motivated by it.
Such as training, information, and resources. Another way to say this is be pleasant while being firm, unless there's a good reason not to soften the message. We will turn next to democratic leadership, sometimes referred to as a participative or participatory leadership style. Rather than giving directions, the leader participates in the group and encourages others to share their ideas and opinions, even though the leader may have the final say over decisions. Rather than telling, the democratic leader guides or facilitates. In Lewin's original research, decisions were made by majority rule rather than by the leader. The democratic leadership style is effective in producing more ideas, both in quantity and creativeness. Because dissenting opinions are heard, decisions may be more effective. Like the children in Lewin's original research, people tend to feel better about being members of the group and may be more committed to the project as well as to the group. An obvious drawback is that decisions take more time. Meetings can seem endless or numerous, especially if the leader isn't skilled. It won't work if your group members aren't competent or motivated. And sometimes you just don't need everyone's input or for them to feel good about the situation.
Yeah, the last part is like too friendly rather than as a leader, right? You're talking about leadership here. This is why many organizations will add the matrix approach, or they'll put a creative team into a mostly hierarchical system, right? You'll have this hierarchical system of quality control, and then after that you'll have this kind of side group, which will be the ones who are the creative team who are trying to innovate and keep up with the market changes. And those people in that group are going to be led by somebody who has a democratic style. It's very hard to get creativity out of an autocratic style, like I said earlier. So there's a point to it. It also should motivate workers who have diverse skills or strong skills. So if there's a very talented group and they're skilled workers, you probably need this approach too. When there is an understanding, I think in a cross-cultural situation, you know, it's really important that you're able to ask questions as a leader. If you come in there and you think you know everything, it's very difficult. So even though maybe most of the time in the day-to-day work, you're autocratic or authoritarian because that's what people expect. But maybe like the change team idea or like Connor, you need to get some kind of group of together who's kind of an influencer group and be able to have them give feedback to you. Because obviously you're going to have questions about consumer choices, about the competitors in your market. So it's definitely requires a certain, you know, balance, I think, in a cross-cultural environment. You don't want them to think that you think that you know everything about their country, right? So, of course, you still have that possibility that you're seen as weak as a leader. Drawbacks. Yes, it takes time. That's why it's a failure in an emergency situation. If the team is weak, has no ideas, not interested in what's happening with the company, then perhaps it's not going to work either. There's also something in our other book that was called compromising, which just means that the leadership is not looking for a democratic, actual process of selecting ideas, but rather is still seeking feedback from staff and takes them into account in their decision making. So probably in a lot of those cross-cultural situations, you might be in that middle place, compromising. It's in our last book from last year. So the leader takes input from other sources and staff, but however reserves the right to make the final decisions on pretty much everything.
When you use this style, encourage your group to communicate. You'll need to monitor the group to ensure that all participate and that no one dominates the discussion. If possible, hold your views to yourself until after others have offered theirs. Treat all ideas with respect, even if you don't agree with them. Hold off on evaluating until all ideas have been voiced. Pay attention to the discussion to make sure it doesn't wander off. An agenda will definitely help in this case. And be aware of your verbal and nonverbal communication to make sure you are using provisional language and that your facial expressions show your interest and a desire to understand. If you are the final decision maker, know when to move from a participant role to the decision maker role. And when you make your decision, explain the rationale without apology. If you are a facilitator who is helping the group make the decision, know when to call for that decision. So encourage.
So that was the difference right there between compromising and democratic. You get together with the team and you bring the team together, and when you feel that there's time for a decision, then your decision, so you're compromising, so you still get the final decision.
Decision maker. Know when to move from a participant role to the decision maker role.
So shift from the participant role. Okay, everybody, that's it. I think we've had enough input. Thank you. Great. Now it's decision time.
And when you make your decision, explain the rationale without apology.
The rationale, okay, based on what I've heard today from you, and you, it makes sense that this is the direction that we go forward. That's the compromising style. The democratic style time for us to vote? All right, we're gonna vote. Everybody yay or nay? So that's pretty rare. I think it's really quite rare that you get votes in a business, but.
If you are a facilitator who is helping the group make the decision, know when to call for that decision. So encourage participation while staying on track. These first two styles, authoritarian and democratic, are discussed the most. In fact, some textbooks omit the third leadership style that Lewin proposed, the laissez-faire approach. Laissez-faire is French for allowed to do. It's been called the do-nothing approach. Laissez-faire leaders use a hands-off style, letting the group members make decisions. Another way to look at it is as a delegative approach. Some suggest that someone who is a role model can end up being a laissez-faire leader, even by doing nothing, or at least not intentionally doing something. Others will emulate them. Also, consider how someone's mere presence can motivate the group. A group tends to be more productive and focused if a manager is on the premises, even if the manager does nothing but observe. It can be highly effective with highly skilled and motivated teams that, when given appropriate direction and resources at the beginning, can complete the project with minimal involvement by the leader. This style can also work well if independence is a value of the group. But if the group is neither competent nor motivated, this leadership style can be disastrous. Group members may be dissatisfied.
You would never do this with an unskilled environment, ever. Of course not. Okay, guys, there's the concrete, there's the digger truck, there are the other tools. I'll be back in about a week. Build me a house. That's what you tell our construction workers. Just build us a house. There's the stuff there. Good luck. Yeah, it's not going to work. They might even be really skilled, but you're still not going to have you're not going to have the house that you want, right? It's a hands-off style for a reason. It's a hands-off style because you actually don't need to add anything to what's being done. These are typically situations where we need a facilitator. We need someone who can get us customers. We need someone who's got a different skill set. So if you're, the good examples are teachers, good examples are game developers, and good examples might be doctors, right? So these kind of jobs require that the person who's actually performing the job, typically in a flatter structure, but whoever's performing the job, not only do they have more skills than the person who is their authority or their manager, quote, they're absolutely able to do the job with, in various ways or in with levels of competence that is, what you need already. You don't need to go in there and tell, if you do need to tell a brain surgeon how to operate on a brain, then you need a new brain surgeon because that brain surgeon is a failure. So, your job as a manager of that hospital is to use a different skill set. Management, leading, marketing, organizing, but not, actually not even that much leading. Just basically organizing resources and getting customers, finding people who need brain surgery and getting them to the doctors. That's how you support your staff in that situation, is you do what they cannot do. So and then when you add that to a cross-cultural environment, it's not the worst idea when you first have new staff in a new country to maybe use the laissez-faire style in a different way, understanding that those people who work and live in the country. Okay, I'm imagining you're a manager who's getting offshored to another country, and now you're managing people who are not of your culture, and it would probably make sense to sit back and learn over time about how people do their jobs and what they do before you can make an evaluation or even support what they're doing. Because they know the culture. It's easy for me to tell somebody, this is the way you do customer service in my country, so you should do it here. And then they look at you, your staff is like, yeah, but people don't expect that, and they actually will be confused by that style of service. As a foreign manager, you might take it the other way and say, well, actually, we really believe in the standardization of our customer service, Starbucks, for example. And even though people are not used to it, after some time, they will become used to it. And after some time, customers will also become used to it. We want to set a new standard. So it can happen that way. That can be a way that you might have to balance the choices that you're gonna, or at least how you apply certain policies that you're using from the home country in a foreign country.
Satisfied with the group's progress and the leader. Oftentimes, if a laissez-faire leader is ineffective, someone else with an authoritarian or democratic style will take over, meaning that the laissez-faire leader is a leader in name only. If you plan to use this style, make sure you provide the necessary information, background, tools, and resources in the beginning. Ensure that all know of looming deadlines. Monitor the group's progress from a distance so that you can step in if necessary. Be flexible. You may need to change leadership styles. The takeaway from this is, if you're going to be a laissez-faire leader, make sure the style is warranted and be willing to change. Processing time. Which of Lewin's 3 leadership styles do you think is the most effective?
The answer is, it depends.
According to Lewin, the most effective leadership style was democratic, while the least effective was laissez-faire. As Lewin's research was done with children, do you think his findings can be generalized to adults?
No.
Lewin believed that we all have a dominant leadership style, the style we prefer to use. Which of these 3 styles do you think is your preferred style? You may have answered, it depends.
Yeah, that's what I did.
This last one. That's not a surprise, as Lewin's theory was used to develop other leadership styles theories, most notably Hersey and Blanchard's situational leadership theory. So we can credit Lewin for some of the manner.
Ta-da! This is a beautiful segue into Blanchard's. That was the best segue ever. I should be a DJ again. Come on, Ben. The situational leadership model. I love this one. It's one of my favorites.
Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we're looking at the situational leadership model. So first, some background. Now, the situational leadership model was developed by Dr. Paul Hersey and Kenneth Blanchard. It's predicated on the belief that there is no one best style of leadership. The best style of leadership will depend on the situation, and that means the task to be performed and the makeup of the team performing the task. So thus, the best leaders take the time to weigh the many variables affecting their situation and then select their leadership style to best match their situation. So let's look at the model itself. Now, most of us naturally adjust our style to suit the situation, whether we realize it or not. So, for example, we give a newly hired team member more slack to make mistakes than seasoned employees, and we might direct tasks more closely when a deadline is urgent and important. Now, of our style, only in a more deliberate way.
Alright, I think we need to look at this chart better. Now, I did this last year, and that's why I like it, because it lets me use one of it reminds me of my old career, my old work. In publishing, right? I was once a situational leader. Get a nice picture. It's okay. It's a little bit blurry. It's not you. It's not your eyes. It isn't. It's the thing is blurry, which is not good. Is that the same one? Jeez. Oh, it's not. Sorry, let me get it one. This one's not going to be blurry. Oh, it might be the same website from two different legs. Aha! Here, this one looks nice. Alright, so I'll just use my example again, but now we can think about it in a cross-cultural context. I was cross-cultural. I had to manage the staff from the U.S. I had writers from the U.S. I had a lot of Czech Republic staff. It was always very complicated to motivate, and you're always going to make mistakes. I guess in the end, you have to at least be able to admit that you're making mistakes for people to trust you and to allow you to grow into your leadership model. So my career was producing magazines, and so what would happen in a circle of a monthly circle, because each month we would produce a product, is that I would be read for the end of the cycle. So we have two kinds of behavior. Okay, I want to support, I want to facilitate, I want to ask about the resources that I can provide, I want to give advice. Here, I want to tell you what I need you to do. I need to direct. So it's like two kinds of leadership, compromising and directing together, mixed, depending on the situation. So it's the beginning of the month. We just released the last magazine. It's the end, and it's time to start the cycle again. We don't have any ideas. We don't know what we're going to put in the next magazine. We need content. We need to find some places, some interviews to do, some fashion models or photographers that we can use. We need to get everybody imagining advertising. What's the cover going to look like? What's the topic? What's the theme? So many things to decide. So you're delegating. Okay, you decide what is going to be the main article this month. You work on the music section. You do the fashion. You do the restaurants, whatever. You separate everybody and you give them a job. You're delegating. Quite directive. And not much support. I don't need to support you. Right now, you're investigating. This is what I do at the beginning of the task in this class. I give you the task, and I try to give you some general delegative thing. This is what you need to do. And then you go crazy, and then you think, what do I do? You take time. You start to research. You don't feel comfortable. You don't feel like, nobody's holding your hand. You're trying to decide for yourself, okay, which topic do I want to do? How do I want to approach this? And then you start to have questions, and that's what I'm interested in what's going on, because you're starting to think for yourself and you're starting to come up with a process. So when my writers in the magazine, they have ideas. I say, oh, okay, so you want to do something about compare science fiction film in European cinema. Okay, great. I have phone numbers of people that I can direct you to so you can get more information, so you can do interviews with them, and here's a couple agents of famous people that you can interview to put quotes into the article, and here's some licensed photographs that you can use without having to pay extra money for them. So I can support them in getting their, and then ask them to do a first draft. So here's all the resources, and do that first draft. And that's what I encourage you to do also on your projects, is to do a first draft. The first draft should never be the last draft, ever. And then as you go forward and you have your original ideas and you need to figure out how to complete them, then in the past, usually in the third part of the cycle, not at the beginning. Sometimes at the beginning when I want to scare you, if I want to scare year 11 and I see that they're not really taking the project seriously, or they don't really think about how long a marketing plan is, I'll say, okay, look, here's a 25-page marketing plan. Look at it for 3 minutes, give it to the next person. And they're just like, oh my God. Yeah, so you need to understand what the job is, what you're actually supposed to be doing. But when I give the example to you later in the task, it's so you can understand a little bit about the formatting and what it looks like when it's finished. So I'm trying to get you to the end. I'm trying to get you to the finish line. I'm trying to get you to the point where you feel like your finished product will look like this. My article will look like this. I will tell my writer, you have 2,000 words or whatever. You get limits. You have 3 pictures, 2 pages, 2,000 words. You're maxed out. And I'll edit and I'll say, well, this part is off topic. Get rid of that. I'll help them with editing. Coach them to get the best result possible. And then at the end of the month, I'm at war. I'm just like, I'm coming to your house. I've got a USB. I've got 2 USBs. I've got 5 USBs. I'm coming to your house. I'm putting my USB into your computer and I'm taking the document of whatever you wrote up till now. It must be done tonight. You gotta get it in the computer. You gotta lay it out, print it, make the film, take it to the printer. We have a deadline. It's a hard deadline. There's no game in this deadline. There's no extra time. And, I work with you that way too, right? I try to get you through the project, and at a certain point, I give up. I'm like, no, you should have done this 3 weeks ago. That's it. No, you can't be doing market research right now. No, there's no pest factors right now. It's too late. It's too late. It's too late. Just turn it. So that's the end of the project. So this is, depending on what you know about what your staff is doing, I'll be extremely supportive, like the nicest person on earth. But by the end of the month, it's like, oh my God, he's turned red. He's red now. He's everywhere. He's calling people. It's 3 in the morning, and he's coming to get the pictures that you promised. I won't sleep for 4 or 5 days until I get the magazine into the publisher. Then we'll have a big party and clean ourselves and then start to be green and go and creative again. It's a fun process. Pretty fun process to be a part of. I like projects like this. Only a little more I want to play for this video, maybe. Not too much. Because I think I explained it pretty well. Again, just to review what you do in the situations, you're more autocratic at the end and the beginning. Here they're kind of doing it in an upside down way. What are you doing? You're starting with directing?
But one thing I'm telling you,
Shut up, man. Don't sell me anything. Don't empower my team. I don't care about your team. Monday, whatever, you're not helping me. So according to this stuff, they just kind of put the numbers in different places, but I start with S4, right? That's when the project starts. So minimal direction and guidance, but also giving responsibility. Delegation means to give responsibility. So that's definitely happening. And then supporting, help, give some resources, agree with everything. That sounds cool. What about this? That sounds cool. What about this? That sounds cool. What about this? I do that with you, right? I do that all the time. And then, I have to get your, I'm trying to sell my ideas. I'll give you like options, like option 3, 4, 5. And then, go, well, I think at this time it's probably best that you choose this idea or you go in this direction. You don't really have time to go farther in another direction. So I think that's enough from that. The levels of employee development. Do we have these students in our class? High competence and high commitment. Sometimes we have high competence and variable commitment. It could do better, but this time it's just, there's too much social behavior. Some competence, but low commitment. I guess, yeah. So they're saying that leadership also depends on who you're dealing with. Fair enough. But, all right, I think that's enough. I think we just let that go from now. So I led you from the general Lewin forms of leadership to the situational leadership, and that's going to be really appropriate for cross-cultural situations. And then in the next class, I would like to take that a step towards, so that's, here we are, situational. So after today's lesson, you have autocratic, participative, and situational. Next class, I'm going to talk about leadership traits, and I really will do this diversity thing, I think, in the next class. I don't love it, but I will do it. Different kinds of leadership traits that people will have. All right, so have a great day, and this is, I think, Friday, Thursday or Friday for you, and we'll see you next week. That'll be week number 4. Week number 4, so we can also start moving towards the end of our project. All right, have a great one.